it is a pleasure to have Dan with us this evening, and we'll talk about that in a minute. In September, our fall meeting is going to feature Melissa, who has a very interesting presentation on some old houses and their history in the community. And November 13th, we'll round out the season with a presentation by Cliff Luke. We have not had Cliff as a guest for many, many years. He's going to bring 10 of his favorite unique instruments. And if you know Cliff, he has far more than 10 instruments. But he'll bring them. He has wonderful history on them, and will demonstrate and sing. Some of it will be Christmas oriented, so that'll be the season wrap up. But our speaker tonight is Dan Fries, who is the manager, director at Old World, Wisconsin. And we're pleased to have him with us for a couple of reasons. First of all, Old World is a wonderful story all on its own. Things that have been accomplished there over the last several decades are incredible, but a lot of people don't realize that nationally, Old World, Wisconsin is recognized for its work as an outdoor living museum. So the national recognition is incredible, and that coupled with the State Historical Society and its archives and phenomenal collections, it's wonderful to partner with them when we can. Old World has some wonderful news coming up. I'll let him talk about it in detail, but they have a construction expansion project coming up, which is the first in 20 years, 30 years, 20?
25.
Yeah, it's been a long time between state projects and the economy. That's very exciting. And I think it's very appropriate that it focuses somewhat on the brewing history in Wisconsin. I know that people like to chuckle about it or talk about big parties and what have you, but the various cultures in the state had forms of brewing and did it well, and of course some of it expanded to become the phenomenal names that we know that became nationwide companies. But it's a wonderful project, and without any further ado, I'm going to introduce Dan Fries and let him tell the story.
Thanks for having me this evening. I always start out by asking who here has been to Old World, Wisconsin. Hopefully a lot of you. Yeah, most of the room. It's 44 minutes from this building to Old World, Wisconsin, according to my GPS. So it's not very far down the road. So hopefully after you hear a little bit more about what's going on now, as well as our future plans, you'll be inspired to come and pay us a visit. We're getting ready to open for our 2017 season the first weekend in May. We're open weekends in May, and then we open daily from Memorial Day through Labor Day. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Old World, Wisconsin, and who we are, what we're doing, especially what we're doing this year, and then again talk about some of our exciting plans that the governor announced for us. We weren't quite ready to announce our brewery project, but the governor announced it, and it was quickly picked up by the media, and word has been spreading. So the cat is out of the bag, or the beer is out of the keg, and so even though we hadn't planned on talking about it until we were a little bit further along in the planning process, I'm excited to be able to do that with you this evening, especially given a potential Watertown connection, which I'll be talking about here shortly. But let me start just by talking a little bit about Old World, Wisconsin. How many of you most of you have been there. How many of you have been there in the last, say, 3 years? Thank you. Good. One of the challenges, and we were talking about this earlier with the Octagon House that you have here, it's always a challenge to get people to come back once they've been to a historic house museum or a historic attraction like Old World, Wisconsin. You have to prove to them that there's a reason to come back again and again. And usually what I hear is, yes, I've been to Old World, Wisconsin, and I asked them when, and they said, no matter what their age is, oh, it was for my 4th grade field trip. So getting them to come back after the 4th grade field trip is one of our biggest challenges. So just a little background. First of all, we opened in 1976. We were Wisconsin's official bicentennial project. And the concept was to relocate in one space or one piece of property architecture that represented the ethnic folk building traditions that were brought to Wisconsin by the earliest immigrant settlers. So the idea was to preserve German-influenced architecture, Norwegian-influenced building styles, and to have these in an outdoor museum environment where people could visit and learn about those building traditions and how they all kind of merged together to become what we today think of as Wisconsin architecture or American architecture. So we really started out as an architecture or architectural museum. The idea was it was about a place where buildings would be moved and preserved. But let's face it, unless you're an architect or just a really avid old house geek, you know, the idea of visiting just a museum that's filled with empty buildings that you wander around and look at is not going to, you know, pull them out of Milwaukee and Madison and Chicago and all those metropolitan areas that we're trying to draw people from. So pretty early on, the idea emerged that we would put people in these buildings and dress them in historic costuming of the time period and basically breathe some life into these buildings, into these environments. So it became a living history museum, a concept that in 1976 was still fairly early in developing. There were places like Colonial Williamsburg in Virginia and Old Sturbridge Village in Massachusetts. But for the most part, there were very few of these outdoor living history museums when Old World Wisconsin came along. We're located on 600 acres. This was land that had been owned by the state at the time. One of the ideas was to avoid going out and buying 500, 600 acres of property in order to create the museum. So the state of Wisconsin, who was driving the project, wanted to find land that was already owned by the state that would be suitable for the development of this museum. And they ended up selecting 600 acres in what is still the Kettle Moraine southern unit, just south of Eagle, Wisconsin. So on that 600 acres, 60 buildings were disassembled from as far away as Bayfield, up north, over along the Mississippi River, downtown Milwaukee, and everywhere in between. Meticulously measured, documented, photographed, disassembled, brought to this location, and then rebuilt. And in most cases, at least 50 to 70% of the original building still exists. Obviously, there are some pieces that had to be replaced and new roofs put on and so on. But for the most part, the buildings that we have are pretty well intact. So we're owned by the state of Wisconsin. We're administered by the Wisconsin Historical Society. We're actually one of 12 historic sites and museums administered by the Wisconsin Historical Society. And before you leave, if you're interested in learning more about these, I know the screen is kind of far away for many of you, so I won't go through and list them one by one, but basically this map is available in a much larger format in this brochure, which is also, if any of you are teachers or deal with young people, these are nice pieces to have displayed in a classroom. But this lists information on all 12 of the historic sites and museums administered by the Historical Society. Old World, Wisconsin is by far the largest of these 12. Right now, our annual attendance is usually between 70 and 75,000 guests per year, and about 18,000 of those guests are school students. So we have a lot of school students, not only from Wisconsin, but quite a few from Illinois, because we're not too far from the Illinois-Wisconsin border. So we have a lot of schools that come up from there. So we're owned and operated by the Historical Society, which is a state agency, but we truly are a public-private partnership. We could not exist if it was just the state being involved in this project. So from day one, it was understood that this wasn't going to work if it wasn't a true public-private partnership. So we have the state of Wisconsin that owns the land, owns the building, owns the collection. Most of the employees are paid by the state of Wisconsin. But then we have two foundations that we work with. The Old World Foundation is headquartered right there in Eagle, and they work, for the most part, locally to raise funds and support for projects. And then the Wisconsin Historical Foundation is based in Madison, and they're responsible for raising money not only for Old World Wisconsin, but all 12 of our historic sites and museums. We also operate using a mixture of paid employees and volunteers. So many of the staff members are employed by the state, but we have quite a few volunteers that come out and either participate in specific types of programming. For example, our largest group of volunteers are our volunteer gardeners. And these are master gardeners that just love to get out and work in our historic gardens. They dress in the historic costumes. And whether or not they're a volunteer or a paid staff member, hopefully when you're a guest you can't tell the difference, because they all go through training. They all receive the same training, whether they're paid staff members or volunteers. So our work, this is what we're trying to accomplish. And that is we're creating a new standard for guest experiences, not only at Old World Wisconsin, but really at history museums, history attractions of all sorts. It was mentioned earlier that Old World Wisconsin actually, in some ways, is better known outside Wisconsin than it is in Wisconsin, at least in terms of coming up with innovative ways of making connections between history and people. I'm preaching to the choir tonight because this is a historical society, but let's face it, most people, when you ask them about their passions and their interests, history for most Americans is not very high on their list. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes it's the way they experience history in school, where there's a lot of memorization of dates and people. And what we're trying to do is to show that history can be interactive, it can be fun. Not all history certainly was fun, but we try to make it as enjoyable and as memorable as possible. We make it authentic. I mean, one of the things that we're really advocates for is making sure that we do a lot of research. Again, we have the Wisconsin Historical Society library at our fingertips, which you may not know is actually the second largest history library in the nation behind the Library of Congress. So right here in Madison, just not too far away from us, there's a wealth of information that we use every day in Old World to create programming that try to hit on those 5 points. We also aim to create experiences that are multi-generational in their focus. In other words, we don't have the kids programs over here and the adult programs over here. We're really trying to develop experiences that would meet the needs of a multi-generational family group, which is the bulk of our attendance. You have the grandparents, the parents, and the kids of all ages that come together as a group. So in order to be successful, we need to make sure that there's something for everyone. So it's like laying out a smorgasbord. You want to put stuff out, that anybody in your party is going to find something of interest. So we design experiences that parents and children can do together, or adults can do by themselves if it's an adult couple without children that are visiting. Even though they may be hands-on and involve participation, which sometimes adults are a little leery about doing. Kids will jump right in there and do it, but sometimes it takes a little bit more to get adults to jump in and do those activities. But that's really what we're trying to do is to create those experiences that anyone, no matter what their age, what their background, what their interests, would find appealing. We're also an agricultural site. And in this day and age, as more and more people become disconnected with the land, and we draw primarily from the suburbs of Milwaukee and the northern Chicago suburbs like Schaumburg and places like that. And these are places where kids have never seen a farm animal before up close. So when you look, if you can see, those of you in the back, the look on that girl's face when she gets to touch a lamb for the first time. Those of us that grew up on farms and live on farms sometimes take these experiences for granted. But again, for some of our guests, we used to talk about the differences between an 1860 plow and a 1900 plow, until we realized that we have to start with telling them what a plow is and what a plow is used for, and then kind of dial it back to just the basic information. We have to do that with animals. We've had kids from urban schools come out and not be able to tell the difference between cows and sheep. They think the sheep are little cows. That's a pretty drastic example, but it has happened. So one of our goals is to create farm landscapes. So all these buildings that we started out with are now working farms where we have over, right now, because lambs are being born like crazy, so we probably have about 100 animals throughout the grounds that we care for in those different farm environments. And these aren't just any animals, these are heritage breeds. Rare breeds of animals that, for whatever reason, have fallen out of favor commercially over the years. But it's important to preserve them, not only because they have interesting stories connected to them, but because in some cases, you don't want to have that genetic pool just disappear, because you never know when those genes could be valuable for whatever reason. So we're working with a national organization called the Livestock Breeds Conservancy to not only raise these animals, but as a farmer once told me, the best way to preserve these animals is to eat them, is to show that these animals have some value commercially. Great example is one of the hog breeds that we have are called Ossabaw Island hogs. And they were found on Ossabaw Island, which is off the coast of Georgia, and back in the 1950s. And it is believed now that these were hogs that were purposely put on this island by early Spanish sailors. And when Spain controlled Florida and much of the southeast coast, and there was a lot of traffic going back and forth between Spain and the New World, as these sailors would be getting ready to make their voyage back to Europe, they would stop and load up hogs from this island live and then butcher them about halfway across the ocean, so they had fresh meat to eat during that point of their voyage. So these hogs, I wish I had put a picture of them up here for you, but they look like wild boars, or more like wild boars than they do some of our modern hog breeds. But these hogs remained isolated on this island and only bred within that group. So they still retain all the physical characteristics that the hogs that were put there in the 16th century or 17th century had. So really interesting story. And worth preserving these hogs for their own historical purposes. But what has now been discovered is these hogs make great prosciutto. So now they're actually making a bit of a comeback because folks that are in the prosciutto business are desiring this particular meat to use in making prosciutto. We do the same thing with gardens and with plants. We have about a dozen or so gardens located throughout the grounds. And again, instead of just, getting whatever Burpees has available this year, we save seed from heirloom plants that we've collected over the years and worked with others to obtain seed. So to the best of our ability, when you go into an 1880 German immigrant farm at Old World, Wisconsin, and you wander into the garden, you're seeing the actual varieties of plants that an immigrant German family would have grown in their gardens back during that time in Wisconsin. So again, we save the seed. We do a lot of classes and workshops. As a matter of fact, one of our events this year is an heirloom garden weekend, and there's some bookmarks back at the back doors that you're welcome to pick up that promote that particular event. But if you're interested in gardening, that would be the weekend to come out and learn as much as possible about these historic varieties of plants. We like to say that every day in Old World, Wisconsin is a day worth visiting, and we really strive to make sure that anybody who comes, no matter what day of the week or what time of the year, has a wonderful experience. But we do have a lot of special events throughout the year. One of them is our 4th of July parade, and I put up one of the accolades that we've obtained, a Travel Leisure magazine, which some of you may subscribe to or look at the doctor's office, has named Old World, Wisconsin 4th of July parade that we do as one of the top 10 4th of July parades in the country. I mean, all the parades in the country, and they picked ours. And we didn't even know we were in the running. It just kind of came to us as a surprise. So that's our busiest single day of the year, because we have a lot going on, and then it's culminated towards the end of the day with this really unique parade. Lots of horse-drawn wagons and things that you would have found 150 years ago. Another event that's really popular is World of Little House. This year marks the 150th anniversary of the birth of Laura Ingalls Wilder, who was born here in Wisconsin over near the Mississippi River. And when you stop and think about the number of young people that have been inspired by reading the Little House on the Prairie books to think about what it was like to live in the past, she's probably had the greatest impact on young people thinking about history of any person I can think of. So we have an event. This is actually one that we've been doing for years, but this year is going to be extra special because of that anniversary. We have 10 days in July where we try, above and beyond what we normally do, to make connections between the things that we do out on the grounds with the stories, the Little House on the Prairie stories. So we get a lot of little girls wearing bonnets during those 10 days. Oh, well, there was more to this slide when it was created. It was a list of some of our other special events. And one of those was our first weekend, which again is coming up May 6th and 7th. During our opening weekend, we do sheep shearing, which is a very popular activity. Funny story is the people that do all of our marketing wouldn't use that picture because they said at first glance it looks like he's killing the sheep. But for people that have never seen sheep being shorn, it does look like there's something nasty going on. But that's just how you get the wool off this time of year. Some of the other special events that we have coming up fairly soon is our Mother's Day. On Mother's Day, all moms get in free. So those of you that are moms or have moms, good day to visit. We also do a Mother's Day buffet in our Clousing barn. That's a really nice event too. Oh, here we go. I just have to click on them individually. Here we go. Our Midsummer weekend is a Scandinavian event. When we celebrate a lot of Scandinavian traditions associated with the summer solstice. This year, however, we have a really unique opportunity. It is the any Finns in the room? Anybody with Finnish ancestry? Not too many around this part of the state. They're more up north. This is the 100th anniversary of Finland's independence from Russia. And so as part of that, Finland is having a sauna travel the United States on a 10,000-mile journey. And it's making one of its stops at Old World, Wisconsin during that weekend. So we have a historic sauna as part of one of our Finnish farmsteads. So we're going to have the modern sauna, which is a working sauna, parked next to it, so you can go inside and feel how hot they get. And then you can walk into the historic sauna and see how smoky they got. And then we're having a couple of special, very limited opportunities where guests after hours can actually come and take a real sauna. Independence Day I mentioned, World Little House I mentioned. Here's our Heirloom Garden Weekend. All of these dates and all this information is on our website, so if you're looking for any of this information after this evening, it's pretty easy to get on a hold of. Wisconsin Journey is a new program that we're launching this fall, where you actually take on the role of an immigrant to Wisconsin and go through the process of packing your immigrant trunk to come to America and making decisions about what you take with you and what you leave behind, because you can only take so much in this trunk. You go through the process of homesteading, and then at the very end, you participate in a naturalization ceremony and become sworn in as a new U.S. citizen. And we feel this program is really important for a couple of reasons. Again, we're a museum about the immigrant experience, but also, I mean, you can't pick up a newspaper or turn on the radio or TV without seeing immigration these days as a topic. So this is very timely for people to think about the fact, you know, that immigration is not a new topic. It's something that's been with us for many, many years. Legends and Lore is our Halloween event. This is the 5th year that we've been doing this. It's an evening event. It takes place in our village area at night, sponsored by Watertown Bank. And unlike a lot of the Halloween events that have become really popular, where people are chasing you with chainsaws and all kinds of gore, this really kind of gets back to the storytelling associated with Halloween. And we've gone back to some of those European ghost stories and things that these immigrants brought with them, and use those as the basis for the exhibits and activities that take place that evening. And then last but not least, we actually close in October, but then we reopen the first 2 weekends in December for a Christmas event, which is a very popular event too. If you're a member of the Historical Society, there are a few other events that we have going on this year. We have an ice cream social. These are all evening events as part of the Laura Ingalls Wilder event that we have in July. The beer brewing program, which I'll be talking about here in a minute, we're going to be doing an evening where a lot of these brewers, back when there were a lot of breweries in Wisconsin, they all tended to get along and get together and have meetings and talk shop and drink beer. So we're essentially going to recreate one of those, which will come with an opportunity to sample some historic beers, and that's on August 19th. And then we've had a lot of photographers ask us about the possibility of coming out in the evening when the light is at its best to take photographs on the ground. Well, normally we close at 5, but on this one evening, September 23rd, we're actually going to stay open later. And again, if you're a member of the Historical Society, you can come out. We're actually bringing in a tintype photographer that evening too, to talk about photography and how it was done in the 19th century. We also have a couple of events that are sponsored by the Old World Foundation. Midsummer Magic is an evening where we open the grounds, and it's not a historical event because there'll be an oldies rock band playing on the porch of one of the buildings and, barbecue and wine, but it's just a nice, fun summer evening for adults. And that's one of the major fundraising events that the Old World Foundation hosts. And then Oktoberfest, which we've done, this will be the third year, which focuses on the Oktoberfest tradition here in Wisconsin. So we've been doing a lot of studies of what it takes to get people to get off their couches and come to Old World, Wisconsin. And there have been studies done nationally that look at the decision-making process, particularly among families, and what it makes them decide that they're going to go and visit a particular place like Old World, Wisconsin. And after all the surveying, thousands and thousands of families talked to, the number one question is, will it be fun? And this gets back to that smorgasbord concept that I mentioned earlier. If I take my kids there, are they going to have fun? If I take my parents there, are they going to have fun? Everybody is concerned about making sure that it's a pleasant experience for everybody in their party. So that's the number one question that's asked. So we've, in the last few years, have specifically designed new exhibits, new programs that really teach history, but also create a very fun experience. And this is a great example. First of all, there are two teenagers smiling. So if you see two teenagers smiling, you know you did something right. So we created this experience about cycling and the origins of cycling in Wisconsin in the 1890s, which is really when it began to take off as a recreational activity. Of course, cycling's still big today, and we're not too far from Trek's headquarters now. But we wanted to actually allow people to experience the excitement of cycling during its early years. Well, when you first think about cycling in the 19th century, you think of those great big high-wheel bicycles. Well, there's no way our lawyers would allow us to put our guests up on one of those dangerous contraptions. So we did some research, and we found out that in the 1880s, 1890s, these three-wheeled adult tricycles were very popular, particularly with older people that wanted to get into cycling but didn't want to risk their lives. As a matter of fact, these were very popular with doctors, and for a while there was a real push in the medical community to get doctors to adopt these versus horse and buggies and making house calls, because they felt that you could get on your tricycle much faster than you could hook up the horse and buggy. But women rode these because you could ride them with a skirt. And so we found a company in California that was able to make replicas of these adult tricycles. So we've created a track where guests we have 3 of these, and they can ride them around this track. And then next to it is a building that has an exhibit about cycling technology, and there is an actual stationary high wheel bike that you can get up on and pedal, but it's mounted to the floor so that you can't fall it over. But this is an example of how you can take a topic from history, like the origins of cycling in Wisconsin, and turn it into an experience where now what we're finding is that this is the first place that they want to go when they come, and it's the last place they want to go before they leave. So it's not only popular enough that it makes them want to come back for another visit, it's actually popular enough that even while they're there, they want to do it more than once. So, and one of the pieces of research that we did is we did a survey. We have about 10,000 people that follow us on Facebook. So we sent out to all the people connected to us through Facebook. Describe Old World, Wisconsin in 3 words or less. And I don't know if you've seen these word clouds before, but there's a computer program now that can take all that information and enter it into this this graph essentially. So the more times a word is mentioned, the larger the word appears in the word cloud. So this is the word cloud that's a result of that exercise. And as you can see, history and fun are the two most noticeable words that are included there. So again, we feel like we must be doing some things right, because people are starting to connect us with history and fun and experience is right up there, education as well. Okay, so I'm going to shift gears now and talk about not just what's coming this year, but what's coming in future years as a result to reinvent the entrance area of Old World, Wisconsin. And again, I apologize, many of you aren't going to be able to see the top image there, but that's an aerial photograph from the summer of 2010 when a tornado went through Old World, Wisconsin. And fortunately, it did not do any significant damage to any of the historic buildings that we're preserving. But it essentially went right through the parking lot. Again, I don't know how well you can see. This is the parking lot here. And if you visited Old World, Wisconsin back before the tornado, you probably remember all these pine trees that were planted within the parking area. You literally parked among the pines. So the tornado came right through basically our front door. This is the main entrance to Old World, Wisconsin right here. So Mother Nature forever altered what that space in Old World, Wisconsin looked like. So this happened right about the time Old World, Wisconsin was updating its master plan. Again, founded in 1976, so we had existed for 30 years without really any significant updates. So we decided it was time to take a fresh look at what we want the future Old World, Wisconsin to look like. And when that tornado happened, a lot of the people, and I was not yet part of the Old World team, I came just after the tornado. But a lot of people began to think, okay, this area is forever damaged, so we need to find a new front doorstep for Old World, Wisconsin. Me, however, having never seen those trees, I had no emotional attachment to them. To me, it looked like basically Mother Nature had done what the early settlers did, and that is came in and cleared all the trees off the land and turned it into a farm landscape. So that's really the direction that we're going now, is creating a new entrance experience inspire other people to do the same thing. We don't want the only place that you can find these unique beans or tomatoes or whatever they are at a museum. So this garden is going to be a place where people can actually learn how to plant these plants in their own home landscapes. So think of it as a 19th century extension service. And then next to it, in that little building, we're going to have, it won't open this year, but next year, a garden shop where you can actually buy seeds, you can buy plants, you can buy hand-thrown reproduction, 19th century style flower pots, you can buy garden trowels made by the blacksmith. All things garden related or garden tradition related would be available in that particular shop. Again, if you've been to Old World on a busy day, there's often long lines going out of this building, people waiting to get in and buy their tickets. So we're actually going to separate ticketing from the barn and create a separate ticketing area right here, which is actually going to look like a 19th century train station. And it'll have 3 windows so that there'll be 3 opportunities to form a line, one of which will be for members, because again, we're encouraging people to become members. So if you're a member, you can get through the line much faster. So we want to make sure that we accommodate those folks. There's going to be a new timber frame pavilion right here. One of the things that happened when we lost the trees is we lost the shade that we had for those 18,000 school kids that came every year and needed a place to eat lunch. So as a temporary solution, we've been renting a large tent to put picnic tables under on an annual basis. But this will replace that with a timber frame, very rustic, attractive looking pavilion that will seat about 200 people, that will function as a place for those school lunches, but also could be used in the evening for a private event, a company picnic, something along those lines. In the center is a pavilion. We have usually about 30 to 40 weddings at Old World, Wisconsin a year. And right now we have a temporary little gazebo that we set up for those wedding receptions. The idea is to create a permanent, larger, more of a bandstand size that can serve as a location for weddings, but also on larger attendance days, we could actually have a band playing in the gazebo as folks are making their way onto the site. We wanted something that would make it very clear that this is the entrance. This, no matter where you park, this is where you go to get in. So the idea eventually came about to put in a 19th century windmill that would be located near the center. And of course, with the height of the windmill, it would tower above everything else and be kind of that visual clue that follow me, come this way. Plus, there's the constant motion associated with the turning of the blades. But we wanted it to be more than just a 19th century windmill. We wanted to use it as an opportunity to talk about science, technology, engineering, and math, what you commonly hear now as STEM, to show that you can not only learn about history at a place like Old World, Wisconsin, but you can learn about history, science, all this kind of all folded together into a multidisciplinary experience. So we're actually working with the Milwaukee School of Engineering and some other partners that are still in the works to come up with this exhibit around the historic windmill that will basically look at wind energy, how it's been used in the past, how you combined wind energy with pump technology to pump water out of the ground, which is obviously what early farmers were using this for. But then also touching on how we use wind power today and how it might be used in the future. So the last part of this is again more inspirational in nature, where there'll be an outdoor windmill lab, so to speak, where people can design and create their own wind engines and test them in that location to see if they work. And then last but not least, the idea of a historic brewery has been part of Old World, Wisconsin's plans since the 1970s. And it, for a variety of reasons, never materialized. The original idea was to have the brewery out on the grounds, out in the German area, which, you know, from a thematic standpoint, it makes sense to have the brewery out among the Germans, because that's the story we're telling. The problem is that's the back part of our property, and there's no way to access that part of the property for evening events. So we wanted to make sure that the brewery served two functions. One is to tell the story of the origins of the beer brewing industry in Wisconsin and how that beer was made. But we also want to actually create a beer that can be sold. We're actually in the process of getting a license so that even though the beer is going to be brewed the old way in wooden vats and the way it was made 150 years ago, we'll actually be able to sell it and promote it as a very unique experience. This is the only place. It won't be bottled, it won't be sold off-site. The only place you're going to be able to get this beer experience is by coming to Old World, Wisconsin. So we decided to move it up to this front area so that we could take advantage of it as an opportunity for, again, evening events, company picnics and things, private picnics and parties, so that it can be easily accessed after 5 o'clock. So originally, the idea was to build a replica brewery building with a beer garden adjacent to it. That was kind of the direction that we were going until we were contacted about the availability of the Langhoff house barn, which is just a few miles out of town.
Okay, because you keep going up there and getting the light. I think there's a pointer on that.
Oh, okay.
little key. That would be easier for you.
Okay, let's try and see. Hey, how about that? Thanks. So, Elaine has made this building available, her and her family, to Old World, Wisconsin. It's an interesting story because actually back in 1976, Old World, Wisconsin was interested in acquiring this building to move when the museum was being created, but the family at that point in time was interested in maintaining it and keeping it. But now that this building has been offered to us, we're in the process of exploring the cost of moving and restoring this house barn. Are many of you familiar? Elaine, I don't know how much. Have you done a program before, or Mike, on this building? Are folks aware of the building? But a house barn is a very rare architectural example. Somewhat common in Europe, where you had basically the family and the animals living under the same roof. And in this case, you can actually see it better with the historic image before the garage door was added. You can see where that is now. But the family would have lived in this part of the house. This was a pretty typical dwelling, a German immigrant dwelling. And then the other part of the house was the barn. So everything under one roof. This again was common in Germany, but when Germans came to America, this didn't transition very well. I think a lot of it was because of the abundance of building materials that existed here. There's a bit of conservation of materials associated with building a house and a barn together under one roof, as opposed to two separate buildings. So this is a very rare type of German immigrant architecture. So the idea now that we're exploring is using this building for the brewery, so that the actual beer brewing would occur in the barn half of the building, and the half of the building that the family lived in would be an exhibit to show what the dwelling would look like, but also an indoor space where beer could be served when it's too chilly to sit out in the beer garden. So again, I mentioned earlier jokingly that the governor kind of jumped the gun by, first of all, we're grateful that he approved going forward with this project, which was then approved by the State Building Commission, even though there are zero tax dollars to be involved with this project. The idea is that since we're state-owned property, anytime you build a building on state-owned property, you have to go through the same approval process that a new dormitory at UW-Madison goes through, because you're building a building on state property. So we've gone through that process and have received the green light to move forward. So now we're in the process of raising the funds that would be necessary. And it's going to be more expensive to disassemble and restore this building than to build just a replica building. So that's the thing that we're looking at right now is, are there sufficient funds available to allow us to do that before a final decision is made. The one thing I didn't mention is right now there is one other historic brewery operating in the country. It's in Dayton, Ohio, and of all places. And the thing that's going to make our brewery unique is we're actually going to grow the heirloom hops and the heirloom barley, the actual varieties of these crops that were used by brewers in the 19th century at Old World, Wisconsin, using horsepower. So, I mean, you can't get any more historic than actually not just doing the brewing historically, but actually raising the products that are going to be needed for the brewing using historic methods as well. So we're already brewing beer at Old World, Wisconsin, because the idea is by the time this new brewery is built, which is still several years down the road, 2 to 3 years, I would guess, we want to make sure that by the time we're ready to move into this new facility, we know what in the heck we're doing. And just to give you an example of how far we need to move that dial, the first batch of beer that we made, this gentleman who's at the back is a retired master brewer from Miller. We actually have 2 retired master brewers from Miller that are involved in this project. One of whom actually did his apprenticeship at a small rural brewery in Germany, which he said in the 1950s in Germany, in rural areas, they were basically brewing the same way they did in America in the 19th century. So, but Tim Murphy took the beer home, he fermented it, he let it age, he opened the bottle, he tasted it, and he sent everybody involved in the project an email, and the email all it said was, "Brewski, not so goodski." So that's where we started. So the idea is in 4 years or whatever to go from brewski, not so goodski to the kind of beer you actually want to sit down and enjoy. So we have a temporary brew house that we're using, which is out in the German area. So if you come and visit this summer, if you go to the website, the Old World website, it lists all the dates that we have brewing scheduled. It's not something we can do every day at this point. And it's roughly 2 to 3 times a month, I believe. And I think it's always a Saturday. Well, no, it's not always a Saturday, because we're brewing on the 4th of July, I know, and that's not a Saturday. But anyway, so you can go to the website and see the dates. But you can come out and you can actually see the brewing volunteers that are working to recreate the actual historic processes. So at this point, we're not yet using our own hops. We have hops planted, but they're not far enough along that we can actually use them for the brewing. We're not using our own barley because we actually got a very rare heirloom variety of barley from South Dakota University. They had some of this seed in their seed bank, and they could only give us a small amount. So for the past few years, we've been planting and then saving the seed and planting more. saving the seeds. So we're growing our inventory. So we're not quite to the point where we can use it. But we are processing it accurately. So if you've ever seen the old-fashioned wooden flails where they would thresh the grain by, striking these clubs on the stalks, we actually do that as a program and actually involve the guests in that process so they can actually help us out. So I wanted to end just by, again, emphasizing that this is a very complex partnership. There's just some of the partners, and actually since this slide is created, even more have come on board. The one I wanted to point out, though, is the Museum of Beer and Brewing. The volunteers that I've mentioned, retired brewers from Miller that have been out helping us with the project, they're all part of this Museum of Beer and Brewing, which is located in Milwaukee, although they don't have an actual physical museum yet. It's a fairly young group, and their long-range plans are to create a museum. So with that, I will end. I've probably gone way past my allotted time, but if there's a little bit of time for any questions, I'm happy to.
I got a couple.
Yeah.
One, what's the slowest day you have during the week?
The slowest day?
Slowest day.
Well, when we're open, it's usually weather dependent, because when we're open daily after Memorial Day, even like a Tuesday can suddenly be busy if the weather's beautiful. So it tends to be the days where it's a little cloudy and it looks like it might rain.
And then the other question I had, are you now, or are you going to use, as Germany used to use, the Purity Act, where it's all natural, no artificial things? And I know Germany stopped it about, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, because you go to jail there if you didn't abide by the Purity Act.
We're not using it as the act, but just because we're trying to recreate the beer that would have been brewed 150 years ago. It was all natural, and everything was grown right there on the farm. You have to remember, this is back during a time when every little rural community, even clusters of farms, had somebody that was brewing beer. It wasn't, all coming out of Milwaukee or other communities. These little farm breweries were supplying their neighbors, and it was usually, not bottled, or you would just go and you would load up your own buckets or your own tubs. Yes.
So what are they doing for yeast?
That's a good question. I don't know. I'm not really one of the. I know they're getting yeast from. I think the first yeast they got was actually from Miller, so I'm not sure where. If they're not producing their own.
Yeah. So the old breweries, I think, they more or less collected it from the area where they were at.
Yeah.
And then they just started to use that from then forward. But, okay.
Yeah. One of the things that we hope to do is use some of the spent barley to mix with other wheat and create some unique breads that we can bake in a wood-fired oven and make available in addition. So you can have your fresh bread with your beer. The only thing we need to do is get into the cheese making business. Any other questions about either Old World in general or brewing? Yes.
Is Old World looking at putting steam engine on the property someday?
We bring in a steam engine for one weekend a year in the fall. It's somebody's personal steam engine that they bring in for us.
I mean, like build a railroad track and how?
Oh, no, that was actually part of the original master plan, but the cost was just so enormous. Yeah, if you go to like Greenfield Village in Michigan, they have a great steam train that goes around the entire museum. I'd love to have something like that, but it's just really.
That bringing families too. So.
Yeah. The other reason that we stopped exploring that idea was we have the East Troy Electric Railroad just a few miles away, and we didn't want to compete with them because that's their main draw. Yeah.
What are the hours when you're open daily, and is there any way to help, like a shuttle or something to get around?
Yeah, great questions. We're open from 10 to 5 every day that we're open. So whether it's weekends in May, in the fall, or when we're open daily, it's always 10 to 5. And yes, we do have trams that seat about 40 people that go continuously around the property. And we have, I think it's 20 tram stops throughout the grounds. So anywhere where there's one of these stop signs, you can either get on or off a tram. So yeah, we have that service. And we actually just got 2 new trams. Well, they're 2 years old now, so maybe they're not too new, but they run on propane. So we were able to get a grant to operate these propane fueled trams, which have no emissions and much better for the environment. Yes.
What do you estimate the cost of the brewery, and how do you plan to raise the funds for that?
Yeah, the cost right now, that's one of the things that we're still working on. We've had some folks come out and take a look at the Langhoff building and give us some cost estimates. The entire project for everything, we're looking at probably around $4 million for all the future development in that entrance area. The brewery's not, certainly not all of that, but we're still working on those numbers. That's why we were a little concerned that the governor spilled the beans, because we didn't have all those answers yet. So, and was there another question?
How do you plan to raise the funds?
So that's what we're doing right now. And originally the idea was, normally when you do a capital campaign, you wait until you have about 50% or more raised before you announce, hey, we're raising money. But again, since the news is out, we're still doing that. As a matter of fact, I have a meeting tomorrow with Miller Coors. We've been talking with them. We've been talking to the brewing industry throughout Wisconsin. Is our primary focus in terms of raising funds for at least the brewery piece of this. And that includes like the malting industry and some of the other adjunct operations, not just the breweries themselves. The brewing dates that we're doing this year, if you come out, each one of those brewing dates we've partnered with a brewery so that they can have a little setup. And the one thing that we've always been hearing is watching beer being made makes you thirsty. And we weren't selling beer out at that location. So this year what we've done trying to develop these relationships is invite these different breweries to come out and set up and sell their beer and talk about their product on the days when we're actually doing our brewing.
Are there any other questions for Dan?
And again, if you have any questions and want to come up, I'll hang out after the meeting. If you have any other questions, I'd be happy to talk to you.
So before we let you go, I've got a couple of questions, but first a round of applause, please. So we're noticing a lot of new faces in the room tonight. I have a couple of questions about how you heard about our meeting, so just show of hands to the various answers. Watertown Daily Times. Okay. Membership letter that was sent out in February. And then how about Facebook? So a few for Facebook. Okay, we were just curious. So again, thank you. And like Old World, our own Octagon House Museum depends on memberships and visitors and lots of support. Don't always like to do a financial pitch, but if you'd all be so kind, if you're not already members of our society, please take a membership envelope as you leave and support us that way. And tell everyone you know to come up and see us at the museum. We really need support and admissions numbers, and it would mean a lot to us. So thank you. Have a great night.